Hey everyone, I would like to start off with saying just how much I truly appreciate everyone who participated in the last video to help start off this series. It honestly couldn't move forward without you guys because we wouldn't even have a theme or anything. So, thank you so much for your feedback as well as the likes and comments. It truly helps me out so much. And yeah, thanks guys. So, without further ado, my name is Lithex and welcome back to the Building a Fan-Driven Game series where we learn how to build a game from the ground up while completely at the mercy of you guys. Hey guys, in the last video we talked about setting up our Unity project, which I'll actually go on ahead and open now. We did our awesome fan game, and I asked you what you thought we should use for our game theme and our type. And we put all of those comments into the YouTube as well as on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, etc. And for our theme winner, the most voted on is an RTS game with a virus theme in 3D, which, I mean, it sounds pretty awesome to say the least, and it's going to be quite a fun challenge for myself. So, thanks for the idea, and a round of applause for Zeal for picking an awesome theme for us. All right. Oh, also, guys, I noticed in our last video that when I was talking about what Unity version you should use, I actually said project. You don't have to use the same project as me if you're trying to follow. Yeah. So just to be clear, what I meant was just to be safe, you want to use the same Unity version as I'm using. And I'm actually using, you can see it up here, Unity 2019.3.7 F1. And that's just for best case scenarios because sometimes things get depreciated and I'm not going to get into it too much, but it just saves on some troubleshooting for us later. Um, so normally when you get a game, you want to create a game design document, which I have already gone ahead and started one up for us. Yay, look at all that information. So let's just go on ahead and put this info in here. So we're going to do an RTS, um, what was it, or RTS with maybe humans versus virus or something, which would be pretty cool. Okay, and we're going to do this in 3D. So that's kind of all the info I have right now, but we also want to go grab some references. So in order to do that, I'm not going to make you sit here the whole time that I go grab some references, but references are just what we're going to use to kind of keep our mind on track for our style of game. So in the meantime, I'll be right back. Okay, we're back. So I grabbed a few picture references here and I said, maybe something like Age of the Empires, StarCraft, or Warcraft series, are some popular RTS games. And I put a couple pictures here for those of you who maybe not don't know much about RTS style games, which stands for real-time strategy. And I also said, have humans humans have people in hazmat suits or something that or something that try to stop the player who is the virus from infecting their city and killing everyone. So then I just kind of grabbed a little picture from Monsters Inc. with some guys in hazmat suits. So this is just kind of our references for now. This stuff will grow. Our design doc will grow, and I'll have these down in the description below for you guys as well to let you follow along as we go. All right, so let's get started. Let's go back to Unity. All right. Okay, so before we get started, I do just want to say that in order to follow along properly, you should at least have some basic knowledge in Unity and C Sharp. And I'll do my best to explain everything that I'm doing, but I'm not going to explain small things such as what an integer is or, what your console in Unity is. And so if you don't know those first, you should probably go out and at least learn that before you try to follow along in here because we are going to be going over some complex things, including in this video as well. We'll be touching on namespaces and scriptable objects in this video. So um, if you don't want to go learn from somebody else, I can also make videos for that. So just let me know in the comments what you guys think about that, and we'll just go on ahead and get started. So the first things first, we're going to want to make sure our lighting is on, okay? And it's up here by this 2D, 3D option. And the reason I say that is because it's going to be better to see the position of our objects in the scene while we're working right now. Okay, so the first thing that we're probably going to need is like a landmass, right? And maybe a few units, like for our characters, a few RTS units. So let's go on ahead and set that up. We're just going to come in here and we're going to right click, create 3D object. We're going to create a plane. All right. And now we're going to scale this up a bit. Oops, wrong one. Oh, first let's reset the transform so it is centered. And to jump to it just like that, I just press F to focus. And now we'll come up here and scale it up. And to do that, I'm using QWER. That's swapping through these tools very quickly. And I'm actually just going to set this. So we're going to do 5, 5 by 5 by 5. Okay. Well, I guess we didn't have to set the Y, but Y, it's fine. Okay, so now we got somewhere for our units to stand on. Now let's go on ahead and create a unit. So we'll go create, and we're going to create a cube. So with our cube, let's go on ahead and reset the transform. And we're just going to move this up on the Y, 0.5. And that's just going to bring it to where it's right here at the very bottom. And this is why I said to turn the lights on, is because you can really see that it's touching the ground now. And that's the only reason that I was saying we should do that. So again, make sure the transforms are reset. And the way I'm moving the screen around right now is I'm just holding down my right mouse and I'm using WASD, and that moves you around. Q and E are also up and down. Okay, so let's rename this cube to player unit. And this is called camel case, and this is normally the naming convention I use for everything, because it's also used in scripts a lot, though your scripts themselves will be in capitalized. Okay, so we're just going to duplicate this with Control D. We're going to come over here and we'll call this enemy unit. Okay, and then we're just going to move this over. I'm using Control while I drag that for snapping. All right, now we have a player unit and an enemy unit. But we do need a way to distinguish them apart, right? So let's do that now. Let's right click in Assets, create a folder, and we'll call this Materials. Now inside of this folder, let's right click, create, and we're going to create a material. And we'll name this Player Unit Mat for Player Unit Material. Let's Control D to duplicate, and we're going to rename this one to Enemy Unit Mat. There we go. So we need to find a good distinguishable color between these right now. So the enemy, a good color, we're just going to go to this albedo, click this, and we're going to pull up, how about a solid red, because that's good for enemies. And we'll do the same under player unit. So we did red, we go to player unit, and we're going to change this to, let's say, a green. That way we have some distinguishable colors. Now we're going to drag and drop the enemy unit onto enemy unit and player unit onto player unit. Now you can see our good guys and our bad guys are distinguishable. So now that we have a temporary good guy and a bad guy, let's make a folder and call this prefabs. Okay, so we'll call this prefabs. And what we're going to do is we're going to create some prefabs out of these guys. So, and that way we can always access them later. So we're going to grab player unit, drag and drop it into prefabs, enemy unit, drag and drop into prefabs. Now we have a prefab of each of these enemy and player units. So now we need a way to group them together. So we're just going to right click here and we're going to create an empty game object. And then we'll right click on the transform, reset, and we're going to name this player units. Okay, and then we're going to duplicate this, Control D, and we'll rename this enemy units. Okay, so now we'll grab player unit, drag and drop it under player units, and enemy unit, drag and drop under enemy units. Now this just houses all of our objects into one place, so that way we can stay organized while we go. And that also, we don't actually need our enemy units right now. So it makes it very easy if we had, say 50 enemy units around out here. All we have to do is click this enemy units and hide it. And so that hides all of them. Now we only need the one, so we're just going to delete those extras. And we're going to go on ahead and leave that hidden. Okay. Now, one thing that I am noticing is that we are still in the sample scene. And if you've started working in a sample scene, it's okay. A lot of people usually tell you, make your own first, but it doesn't really matter because odds are you're going to delete the sample scene anyway. So just right click on the sample scene, click rename, and we'll just call this unit test environment. And then we'll just reload. Just make sure that you save it first before you do that. And that way all your stuff will be in there. A lot of times it'll ask you if you want to save first, but just in case, it's smart to save first. And normally when I save, I use Control S. Now that only saves the scene unless you do it twice, then it'll save the whole project. A lot of people do say only use Control S to save the scene and then go into File and Save Project to do it. But either way, whatever works best for you. So let's go on ahead and set our camera because our camera's not even doing anything right now. So let's position this, and I know exactly where I want mine. So I'm going to do 2.5 and 25 and 25 and 2.5. Then I'm going to rotate it on the X by 90 degrees. Now what that does is that just positioned our camera above our unit there. So now that we have an RTS style camera, which is kind of like what you see in our references that we had up earlier. There we go. So it's kind of above it. And I guess it is kind of down at an angle a little bit, but we'll worry about that more later. We're just going to kind of put the camera in a rough position for now. So we'll go back to our scene view. And how do we want these units to be more like actual units in a game? So normally they have stats, right? And stats would be anything from, their health, maybe they cost gold to create, their attack, if they have any armor, and things like that. So in order to do that, let's go on ahead and we're going to have to create a C# script for this. So let's go on ahead and go to assets. We're going to go create a folder, and we're just going to call this. I put an underscore here just mainly because that puts it at the top and I can access my scripts quickly. You can do it however you like though. And so inside of this, we're going to go right click, create, a C# script. Now we're going to call this unit. Okay. Now we're going to open it up in Visual Studio by double clicking on it. There we go. And I've already got this zoomed in for you guys. If this is still too small, feel free to let me know and I'll try and make it a little bit bigger. I like this dark theme. If you guys would prefer me to use a light theme, that's okay. I can always switch to that. And if you are on a Mac, just know most everything's going to be the same except for instead of pressing Control, you're going to press Command. And you're going to be using MonoDevelop rather than Visual Studio. And so it's just going to look a little bit different, but it's the same thing. So not to worry there. All right, so to get this started off, let's go on ahead and we're going to create a namespace, which I'll explain namespaces a little bit more in a second, okay? So I'm going to call mine LP for Lithex Productions, and then I'm going to go dot, how about FDG for fan driven game, and then I am going to do dot player because it has to do with the player, and then we'll do dot units because that's what we're working with right now, right? The units. Okay. And this opens up just like any function would. And then you're going to take your entire class and you're going to put it in there. All right. Think of a namespace as sort of a way to organize your code, sort of like a file path. Each bit of code that you use is in the same namespace can be accessed from all other code files in that namespace. And if they're not in there, then you can access them using up here. So like you could type using lp.fdg.player.units, right? So that lets you access your code essentially. All right. So now to moving on from namespaces because I don't, like I said, I don't want to get too deep into what they are, but this is essentially how they're going to work, and it's a way to organize your code. Now, we actually don't need update or start, so I'm going to get rid of both of those. Now, the reason that we are getting rid of those, and we're actually going to change a little bit more on this too, is because the way that we're going to be handling the units is by making them a scriptable object. And a scriptable object is more of a way to store data, and most of our units are just going to be data. You know, they're going to be health, armor, cost, things like that, what they look like. We can store all of this in one spot and access it easily. So think of scriptable objects as sort of like a template to create a lot of the same type of object, but by changing the stats however you like. Now, you could do this by creating a prefab and then change the values, but that's very inefficient and it could easily mess up. So scriptable objects, when done correctly, will benefit you a lot later on. First, to do this, we do not want to derive from mono behavior because this is not going to be sitting on an object. So instead, because remember, it's just a template for our data, it's not actually going to be on the object. So instead, we're actually going to derive this from scriptable object. Imagine that. Now, let's go on ahead and make some variables for the info that we are going to want to store and access later. So the first thing that I'm going to add in here is we have two types of units, right? We have a player unit and we have an enemy unit. So I'm just going to make a public bool is player unit. Okay, that'll let us determine whether or not we are using a player unit or an enemy unit. If it's false, it's enemy, right? All right, I will do a public string unit name. Okay, and how about we need to actually define what the character looks like. So his art, the character's art, and we'll actually set that inside of the character's prefab whenever it's modeled. So what we're going to do is reference a prefab. So we'll do a public game object, and we'll do unit prefab. Okay. Now let's just add some random stats that we want to have. So let's do public int cost, public int attack, oops, and public int health, public int armor. Yeah. Okay, that's good enough for now. So now the reason I put unit name specifically is because objects already have a reference to name. So if I was to put name, you'll notice here that it has this green line that pops up under it. And that's because objects already have a reference of name. But if you wanted to use name and you no longer want this to reference the object's reference to name, then you would have to do public new string name. Now be careful doing that though. Just if you do that, please understand what it does. And we can actually leave this as that because we're not going to be on any other object, and that's okay. So we'll just go on ahead and leave this as is now because I think it might be a little bit easier to remember just name than unit name. So we'll just go on ahead and leave that. Now, let's go on ahead and, let's make a drop down because we're going to have a bunch of different types of units. So we want a way to determine what type of unit we're going to be using. So we're going to put a drop down in the inspector. And the way to do that is we're going to do public enum, we'll call this unit type, and we'll open this up. Now we'll make, let's say, a worker, oops, capitalize that, worker, a warrior, and a healer. We don't have to keep these types. I'm just using this as an example for now. And then in order to get this to pop up in the inspector, we want to reference it. So what we're going to do is I'm going to do this under player unit. So we'll say we want a public unit type, which is this here. We're referencing our enum, public unit type, and we'll just call it type. There we go. So now our objects have a type, which is they're either going to be a worker, a warrior, or a healer. They're going to have a name. They're going to have the art that's going to be for them, and they're going to have a cost, attack, health, and armor. So this is all of the information that we want to save for now. So let's just go on ahead and make sure all this works. Let's save this by pressing Control S, and let's hop back over into Unity, let it compile. All right, so now when we look at unit, notice that all we see here is a reference to the object itself, only for our unit prefab. Now, the reason that is because we actually need to be able to create units from this template, right? So in order to do that, above our class, we're going to come down here and we're going to say, here we go, square brackets, by the way, and we're going to say create asset menu, okay? And we'll say file name equals new unit. And this just explains, or this is what your default name for the file is going to be, which, obviously you'll name it something else when you actually save it, okay? And so then we'll say menu name equals, and we'll say create new unit. And this is what we'll see in the menu, okay? Let's go on ahead and save that. And so now that we can do this, let's go on ahead and hop into Unity. We'll let that compile again. And we're going to just go on ahead and create a unit, right? So in order to do that, we want to, we'll just right click on assets for now. And we'll say create, actually, let's just go on ahead and create a folder. And we'll say, I don't know, units, for example. And inside units, we'll right click, we'll say create. And you'll notice we have this new option up here that we didn't have before. It says create new unit. And the where it got that from is right here. Okay, so we're going to right click and we're going to create new unit. And now we have all of the stats that we wanted to from here. And I'm actually going to rename this because I think create is kind of not needed. So we'll just say new unit. All right, now we have a new unit, and we're going to rename this unit to player worker, okay, because we're just going to use a worker type. We'll say it is a player unit. We'll name him awesome worker man, okay. Now we need a unit prefab, which is why we made the prefabs earlier. So we'll grab a player unit, we'll slap it in there, and this will actually be replaced with our actual art that we wanted to use, but for now, this is our placeholder. We'll say he costs, I don't know, 50 gold. He has some attack. 1, he's just a worker. He can't do much. 25 health. It's 0 armor. Okay, so now we have a character. And that's all we got to do. We're done. Obviously, no, we're not done. But we have just defined a unit called player worker. So we want this player worker now. We need to find a way to put the player worker in our game because as of right now, this is just some cube, and it doesn't have anything on it. Our player worker is only in our project. First, let's set up our hierarchy a little bit better. So we're going to come in here. We don't really want this. We're going to, since we have multiple types of people now, let's just right click in here. We're going to create a new empty object. And let's call this workers. Okay. We no longer need this player unit. So goodbye, buddy. And now we need to make a simple way to just spawn some allied workers. Okay, so in order to do that, we're going to go to scripts, right click, create a new C# script. We're going to call this unit handler. Okay, and go on ahead and open that up in Visual Studio. Okay, so now let's get rid of update since we'll only be using start for now. I actually don't like having that comment there. You can leave that there for yours if you want to. I just don't necessarily want it. We also need to add our namespace in, right? So you have to put the same namespace that we used before. In my case, I'll say namespace lp.fdg.player.units. Okay, and we'll open it up, and we'll cut this and paste it in there. There we go. Now, first, we need to reference what it is that we're going to be spawning, right? So the thing that we're going to be spawning is actually a unit, right? We're not spawning that prefab we made, we're spawning a unit. So let's unit, right? And we'll just call it unit because that's simple enough. Okay. Now, in our start method, let's go on ahead and we're going to create this game object, right? We're going to create it as a game object. So we're going to say game object unit equals. Now, in order to make something appear in the screen, we're just going to use instantiate. So we're going to say equals game object dot instantiate. Oops, game object unit equals instantiate. And what do we want to instantiate? We want the unit. We want its prefab, right? We want that prefab from our unit, okay? And then we want to place it at the transform.position of this parent for now. We're not going to get too complicated, and we're going to use its rotation of the parent as well. Okay, so we need to go back here, and we need to make sure that this is public. Oops. Okay. Go ahead and save it, and then we'll go back to Unity. Now that it's public, you'll see that it's here. Okay, so what is our unit? We want the player worker. That's our unit. We want to use the player worker unit as our unit. So now we're going to go at the end of our instantiate, and we're just going to press comma and then type workers, which isn't quite defined yet, right? That's why we have this red line. So we need a way to determine what workers is. So let's do a public transform, and we need to use transform because we're accessing these positions, not the object itself, right? So we'll do transform, and we'll call it workers. Oops. There we go. So now what this does is it creates our unit prefab at the position and the rotation of workers, and it creates them as a child object of workers. So, oops, got to go in and save it first, and then we'll go back to Unity. Let it compile and hit play. Ah, but it didn't work. The reason why is because in player units, we didn't actually set the workers, right? There we go. So now we defined what we wanted that to be, and we can press play. And there we go, there it is, and there it is, under workers. Now, all of our workers, when they are spawned, are going to pop up under the worker prefab. And there we have it. We have successfully created our units and spawned them into our world, and we learned a little bit about namespaces and scriptable objects. So now I know we covered some pretty complex topics, but not everything in this is going to be so hard, especially if you're just first starting out. So just remember that we're setting up a solid foundation that we continue to build on in later stages. And next time, we will work on some character selection and movement for our units. So in the meantime, now that we have a good theme, what type of units do you think we should have? So, earlier we chose just as a, you know, placeholder, we did worker, warrior, and healer. So, what do you think we should have? And it could be anything. Let's just get creative with it, right? Leave it in the comments below and we'll be adding them to the list. And we don't even have to keep our worker, warrior, or healer, right? So, we can have anything we want. So, don't be shy. Think of whatever you want. And I really just, again, like I can't stress enough, thank you guys so much for watching this series and participating. And if you enjoyed this video and you aren't already part of our community, please consider subscribing and hitting like on the video. It only takes a few seconds and it actually helps me out a ton. And feel free to leave any feedback in the comments as well. I really want to make sure this is as enjoyable for you guys as it is for me, and as well as easy to understand while you're learning. And guys, also, we do have a Discord community. So if you have any questions about the code or you're struggling a little bit, or you just want to come say hi and hang out with me and some of the other guys, just hop down into the description and jump in our Discord. We'd love to see you there. But that's it for this video, guys. I look forward to hearing what type of units you want to have. And until next time, peace.